Hello, I'm Vice Mayor Steve Kay, and we're here downtown in Lexington on the Courthouse Square, kind of underneath the pavilion. And I'm here with Carl Rates, who's a retired faculty member from the University of Kentucky Geography Department, and Rich Greisman, who's a retired senior administrator from UK. We're here today to talk about an app that they've developed for downtown, and I'm going to first ask Rich to say a little bit about where this idea came from, a little bit about what it's going to do, and then we'll continue with the conversation. So Rich, tell me how this idea get started, or what's the genesis?
So it's probably about 2008. We've witnessed an entire block of downtown Lexington torn down. And Dan Rowland and others from Progress Lex organized a rally at the Kentucky Theater to ask the question, is this the best thing we can do with our city architecture? Brought some people from Louisville just to talk about the importance of downtown historic architecture and reuse. Mm-hmm. And it was in that meeting that I came up with the idea that a small way in which I could contribute to the conversation was to take my photographs and get a colleague who I knew could do the historic narrative and produce an app. And so I sent a favorite picture of a downtown architecture piece to Carl and expected that in 3 or 4 months he'd write back because he's busy. 20 minutes later I got a perfectly formed essay, and so began this collaboration.
Okay, so Carl, you got the email from Rich. What was intriguing to you about that? Why did you respond so quickly?
Well, to me, downtown Lexington is a treasure. We are not the size of Louisville or Cincinnati, so we don't have a big spread of venerable old buildings. But what we have is a very nice collection of excellent architecture, and in some cases excellent vernacular architecture, meaning local builders, mm-hmm. And also workman detail. The building behind us here, the Fayette Safety Vault Bank building, has some extraordinary limestone work on it. We don't know who the masons were that did that, but every time I look at that building, I try to imagine the skill and talent and the many, many years of training that went in mm-hmm. to being able to produce a building like that.
Okay, and you said the local architects. Can you give us an idea about who, a few, 2, 3?
Well, Herman Rowe,
yeah.
R-O-W-E, is an individual who has several buildings on the square, but then also on adjoining streets. And he designed in several different styles. He was a German immigrant. He changed his name when he came to Lexington, and he got into a number of businesses, but it turned out that architectural design was apparently one of his favorites, and he certainly excelled at it. So he would be the first one I would point to. The other folk, we don't know who they are.
Oh, really?
They're local builders, and if you go back far enough, for example, the Henry Clay's building over here across the square, mm-hmm. 1805, the folk who were around at the time, Cincinnati Shryock and people of that era, were called house joiners, meaning they built buildings, houses, but other buildings as well, using old half-timbered techniques that were centuries old. Some of which, by the way, still remains on the second story of the Henry Clay building.
Oh, really?
Here. You can't see it from the outside.
Okay.
But Rich and I were fortunate to get in there and have a little guided tour a year and a half ago, I suppose that was.
Yeah. Okay. So is it fair to say that you identified some of these key buildings that you thought people needed to be aware of and pay attention to, and then you did the narrative about these buildings?
Rich and I were freestyling about what's important, how should we do this, what will people want to know, and so the first building we did as an experiment was Wolf Weil down on the east side of Main Street.
Okay.
And that went pretty well, I thought, and Rich subsequently showed what he did with his photographs of that building, and got some very fine reviews from friends of his. So with that then as the kernel, I then started putting together narratives for buildings from Wolf Wiles this way, and so I have 33 buildings that I've written narratives for.
Okay, are they all on Main Street or
No.
Main and
Well, a lot
related?
of them, right? A lot of them are on Main Street, but we have some on Short. And I stopped at 33 in part because I wasn't quite sure how this is going to mature as a project. But the skeleton is done in such a way, and that includes the programming skeleton that the app is built around, so that it's expandable, and we can do a building at a time, a street at a time, over and above what's already there. And I should hasten to add that in the app that we were able to put together here for the Courthouse Square, we've only got 13 of the 33 buildings.
Okay.
And so there's plenty of room to expand that and add Rich's photographs and so on as that develops.
Okay, so Richie mentions the app and your photographs. Why don't you talk first about the app, and then we'll go back to your
Sure.
photographs.
Okay. So we knew we wanted the app as a mobile app on smartphones. We were approaching the city and thinking about how we could do this in a cost-effective way, and I want to brag about the city response.
That's a good thing to do.
I thought you'd like that. The response was really brilliant. I pitched just an iPhone app to keep the cost down, and the folks in the mayor's office came back and said, if we're going to do this, we need to do this right. We need to set it up so that you, Rich, can put Carl's narrative and your photographs together to make content, upload it dynamically without having to need any technical assistance. And we want to set it up so that it's both for Android and iOS iPhones. So what's really brilliant about the design is that I can load buildings ad nauseam with no additional cost. The only additional cost, other than some annual maintenance fee, is that we have to bring Carl back into the studio and be the voice of the narrative. So it's a really lovely design, and I mean rich praise to the folks in the mayor's office, in particular the IT folks. The other person I want to recognize is instrumental here is Mary Quinn Raymer of Visit Lex, who was an early adopter and helped us get entree to the mayor's office.
Okay, so I've got a phone. I download the app. What does it allow me to do?
So some really cool things. In the version we have now, and I'll talk in a bit about the upgrade. In the version we have now, it allows you to go to a page that looks like a typical Google map with pins, like Pinterest and other things. Choose a building among them, and then in a segmented way, hear Carl's narrative and look at my photos as kind of navigational guides.
For more than 2 centuries, downtown commerce has been conducted in structures designed by talented architects and erected by skilled craftspeople. As long as these structures stand, they will continue to tell a story of past and present times and people. Let's begin with a word about central cities. Central cities are visually rich, in part because their historical structures often included a variety of building materials: wood, terracotta, tile, brick, stone.
And we've segmented it so that it allows you to do 2 minutes of a building and then move on, come back, or stay and do as many as 25 minutes in the case of the courthouse. So we've set it up so that someone who has an hour can do all the buildings in an hour if they want to do a really quick study. Someone who has more time can labor, and you can come back and look at this kind of onion that peels slowly. So it's Carl's really luscious narrative, my photographs that act as the navigational guides to enrich the narrative. The next step is to add historical photos to show change over time to buildings. So we're working on that. That will be a kind of virtual carousel, so someone can look at a building like the Fayette Safety Vault building. We'll find photographs that show distinct change over time, as much as 100 years. and then someone can go through the carousel to see how the building changed over time as a reaction to what was happening in Lexington over time.
At the moment, you've got 13 buildings with fairly extensive narrative with Carl's voiceover. Is the next step to add more buildings? Is the next step to add more depth to those buildings?
Right, sure.
Which way are you going to go?
So, and the answer is both. So certainly expand. I have to catch up and take a whole lot of pictures. Carl's way ahead of me, but we want to build up the inventory. But the next big step is interactivity. What we want to do is take an app that we think is inherently interesting, but add the dimension that's missing, which is citizens, walkers, inquisitive walkers, using the app. So the next version to come out in March will have the interactivity of social media. So people on a given page, when they see something and want to react to it, tell us, tell the world, tell fellow Lexingtonians. They can go on our Facebook page or Twitter and talk about it, interact with each other, tell friends to come. Yeah. And so it becomes something that it has a dynamism that we really want to see. The other part of it is to do what the geeks call gamify it, to see it as a platform that invites activity. The best example I can give is having the Bluegrass Trust announce a family scavenger hunt weekend, where we use the app as a way of saying there are 13 architectural features, one in each of the 13 buildings.
So go find
them, take a picture, and the first one to, right. So it's something like this urban challenge that a dear friend once did. So yeah, that's the idea, is to see it as an inherently interesting and educational thing, but also as a tool.
We've moved over in front of the old courthouse, and I want to start to wrap up by asking both of these fine young men, starting with Carl, what you really, kind of the big picture, what do you hope to accomplish? What's this going to do for the city? What's it going to do for downtown?
There are conversations underway in Lexington about the value, the merit of historic buildings. And we have a very active historic preservation community here in the city. We also have folk who are ambivalent about historic buildings. And we have folk who would, well, to be candid, take them down and make room for other things. And so all of those folks should be talking together. And there should be some personal assessment of what you think the value of historic buildings might be for yourself, for your neighborhood, for the community at large. Remembering that what we have right here just on this square was put up over a period, in some cases in 1805 to 1905. We've got a century of fine structures represented here that could not be replicated at probably 100 times the cost of what it put them up to begin with.
Okay. Well, that's a good start. Richard, you want to add?
Yes, another dimension, because Carl's so eloquently explained the historical aspect of it, the architecture. For me, it's also how citizens interact with their city, how to get people even more engaged. It starts with a simple question of visual literacy. When I passed around my pictures of the Wolf Weil building, I had friends who'd walk past the building for years, really smart people, who said, I didn't know it was fluted columns. You know, and so this sense that too often we walk through and not in a city. So it's to build the visual literacy, but it's also to build that conversation about how we interact with our environment and how it helps us interact with each other.
Okay. So, as I understand it, you've had some funding from the city. Did you get some funding from Visit Lex?
Yes.
And your time you have donated entirely, is that correct?
That's right. This is our gift to the city.
Well, let me say on behalf of the city,
please,
if I can, thank you so much for being here today and talking about the app and for doing all this work. It's really quite exciting, I think. Before we stop, the app itself is named.
Oh, good.
We'll put it up on the screen.
Yeah, sure. LexArch, as one word, LexArch, Tour, T-O-U-R.
Okay. And anybody with a smartphone can come down, download it
for free,
walk around, get in front of the building, identify it, hear this nice narrative, look at pictures and so on. So,
Yes, the whole
great.
yeah.
Or on a cold, snowy January day, you can sit on your sofa at home
Yes.
and do the same thing.
Yes.
That's a good point. As
Yes.
we're heading into winter. Again,
Exactly.
thank you both for taking the time to be here and
yeah.
for doing all this work. Thank you all for listening.